Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for coming. Before we begin, I just want to acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional territory of the peoples of the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nations. And thank you again for being here with all of us today. With me today are my colleagues, Bill Blair, the Liberal candidate for Scarborough Southwest, Han Dong, the Liberal candidate for Don Valley North, Alan Ho, the Liberal candidate for Markham Unionville, Jean Yip, the Liberal candidate for Scarborough Agincourt, Adam Vaughan, the Liberal candidate for Scarborough Fort York, Helena Jasic, the Liberal candidate for Markham Stouffville, Leah Taylor-Roy, Liberal candidate for Aurora, Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill, Sean Chen, Liberal candidate for Scarborough North, Majid Johari, Liberal candidate for Richmond Hill. I'm sorry if I bear repeating this because I don't know if I did. Helena Jasic, Liberal candidate for Markham Stouffville. Apologies. So although this is going to be an important discussion, it is a conversation I wish we were not having. For generations, Canada has welcomed people from around the world. This is a country strengthened by the diversity of everyone who chooses to call Canada home. You have heard that this election is about a choice. That is what our Liberal campaign has been presenting to Canadians. But that choice, but you take that choice away from millions of Canadians when the Conservatives decide that Chinese Canadians are less intelligent or somehow less worthy of the truth. And this is wrong. Decades ago, when Chinese immigrants first arrived in Canada, many to work on the railway, they came to a land that needed their labor but resented their presence. Because of Canadian multiculturalism and our Charter of Rights and Freedom, I stand before you as a proud Chinese Canadian. I stand before you as having served as a Minister of the Crown. I stand before you as an equal. We are not less intelligent. We are not less worthy of the truth. We are not less Canadian. 我係自豪嘅加拿大華人，我哋都係加拿大人，我哋同樣聰明，同樣追求真理。At a time when Canadians are looking to their leaders for a plan to bring us into the future, the Conservative Party is bringing us backwards by spreading disinformation and stoking fear. They have decided that in order to win an election, they must divide based on our differences and create subsections of Canadians. My colleagues and I will not stand quietly by and watch the Conservative Party of Canada target Chinese Canadians with lies. Bill.
Thank you, Mary, and good afternoon, everyone. I have been advised that many people in the Chinese Canadian community have been receiving phone calls from the Conservative Party, and they are being told in those phone calls something that is not true, something that is a lie, something that is intended to make them fearful and to misinform those Chinese Canadians. And what they are being told is a lie that says that the Liberal Party will legalize all drugs. I want to be very clear to you all. This is a lie. I am the minister and have been the minister responsible for issues of public safety and dealing with the opioid crisis in this country. I have said many, many times in the House of Commons. I have said it publicly. I have said it in committee, and I'm saying it here to you all today, hoping that you will help share the truth with Chinese Canadians across this country. The Liberal government will not, and I repeat, we will not legalize all drugs. We believe that these drugs that are currently responsible for killing so many Canadians are far too dangerous, and therefore we actually have a commitment to a national drug strategy, the first pillar of which is to interdict the supply of these drugs coming into Canada. We are working very hard with our international partners, overseas in the United States and here in Canada, to keep these drugs and their dangerous chemicals out of our country. And we are absolutely committed to enforcing our laws to ensure that these drugs are not available to our children or to our citizens anywhere in Canada. We are also committed to making significant investments to reduce the demand for these drugs among our children. The demand reduction efforts involve public education and research, working with parents, teachers, doctors, communities, and our children to make sure that they know the danger of these drugs to make better choices. We are also very concerned with the number of people who have died in Canada, and so we are also working hard to keep those people from dying and by initiating various harm reduction strategies, because there is no greater responsibility for any government than the safety and the health of their citizens. And finally, we are making significant investments in treatment and rehabilitation. Our commitment to addictions treatment in Canada is $700 million over the next 4 years. By comparison, the Conservatives who only fearmonger and spread falsehoods about drug policy have committed to investing only $36 million over 4 years. $700 million for drug rehabilitation and addiction services versus $36 million. I think it's very clear which government, which party takes this issue seriously and is committed to keeping our communities and our children safe. I will repeat, we will have no intention and will not legalize those dangerous drugs which are responsible for killing our citizens and endangering our children. I also want to talk briefly, if I may, about some of the other things that we are doing in public safety. As many of you know, I spent many years as the Chief of Police in Toronto, and during that time I was responsible for keeping our community safe. I will also tell you that during that 10 years, I often went to Ottawa and I asked for help from the Harper government. But my pleas for help for my city and my citizens fell on deaf ears. And so, at the conclusion of my career as a police chief, I then sought to be elected as a member of Parliament for the Liberal Party. I went to Ottawa, and we have been working tirelessly on making sure that we listen to the police, that we listen to local officials, that we listen to communities, and that we take real action to protect our children and to displace organized crime from our communities. And in our Liberal platform, we have listened to police chiefs and from police officers across the country and communities. They have told us they're very concerned about the number of guns in our community. We know that the Conservatives work for the gun lobby. They take their money and solicit their support. And they have promised to weaken our gun laws. They have promised to make assault rifles more readily available, to make large capacity magazines more readily available, to end the very sensible measures of Bill C-71 that included enhanced background checks, to essentially weaken our gun laws to make them very much like American gun laws. Canadians do not want to live like Americans with all of their guns. And so we have made a commitment to strengthen our gun laws. And the Liberal government will take very significant measures, which I'd like to share briefly with you. First of all, we will ban all military-style assault rifles. These are the weapons that were designed for soldiers to kill other soldiers. There is no place for them in Canadian society, and they have been used many times in Canada, in the United States, and around the world to murder innocent people because they were designed to murder innocent people. And so we will ban them from our country. We are also taking significant steps because we know criminals gain their handguns in our gangs and in communities across Canada from three sources. They get them by smuggling them across the border. After the Conservatives cut more than 1,000 officers from our Custom Border Services and more than 1,200 officers from the RCMP, we have been busy putting those resources back on the border, back in investigations to keep those guns from coming into our country from the United States. We also know that many of those guns are stolen. And for example, the gun that was used in the terrible Danforth shooting that happened last summer, that gun was stolen from a gun store in Saskatchewan, and a few months later ended up in the hands of a criminal who used it to kill 2 young innocent children and injure 13 Canadian citizens as they went about their daily lives. Had that gun been stored properly in a safe or a vault, it would not have ended up on our streets. And so we will bring in legislation that will require that every single handgun in Canada must be stored in a safe or a vault, so it'll be much more difficult for criminals to steal. And I've met with the mayors, I've met with police chiefs, and they said in some of our communities, these guns should not be stored at home. They should only be stored at the range, which is the only legal place that they can be used. We've listened to those police officers, and we've listened to those mayors. We've listened to communities, and we are prepared to work with municipalities to make sure they have the authority they need, to make sure that guns can only be stored in a place that will be safe and appropriate for their circumstances. We have also decided to make very significant investments in what we call red flag laws. We know that many of these guns, if the gun is present in a domestic violence situation where a man and a woman are fighting violently, or in a dispute with your neighbor, or if someone is suicidal and considering taking their own life, or finally if someone is online advocating hatred and violence against a minority group or a religious minority, we know that that can create a very dangerous situation for Canadians. And so we are going to empower the police, but also doctors, teachers, victims, and community to take immediate action to, when those dangerous situations arise, to render them safe, to ensure that no one can have a gun in those circumstances, to suspend their gun licenses and seize guns from that situation. These measures will help keep Canadians safe. We are also prepared to bring in new legislation that will create greater authorities for the police to conduct their investigations and real meaningful penalties for those who engage in gun smuggling, gun trafficking, and gun crimes. Because again, we have actually listened to the police. And finally, it's also important to make investments in communities and in our children so that young people are not drawn into gangs and drugs in the first place. And so we are the only party that is advocating, when elected, we will introduce $250 million. You know, we've tried and we've been working very closely with the provinces. We made available $347 million to the provinces across Canada to deal with guns and gang initiatives. I will tell you, in the 10 years that I was the police chief in Toronto, Ottawa never offered us a nickel to deal with guns and gangs. We made $347 million available. But it's been very difficult to get that money through the province, allocated to municipalities to begin doing the important work that is necessary to keep our communities safe. And so we will continue with the commitment of $347 million, but we've added an additional $250 million, and we'll be going straight to the municipalities, working directly with communities, working with parents and teacher organizations who work with children to help those kids make better choices. All of those investments, coupled with our efforts to lift children out of poverty, to make investments in better housing, to do all of the things that will improve the quality of life in all of our neighborhoods, are measures that a Liberal government will make to keep people safe. And when the Conservatives talk tough on crime, look at what they actually do. They cut funding for the police. They cut funding for the border services. They cut funding for communities. They cut funding for all of the things that keep us safe, and yet they talk tough. And when they're really behind the 8 ball, they tell lies. And they suggest that we, the Liberals, will do something that we have always said we would not do. The Prime Minister has said it. I have said it, the Health Minister has said it, the Justice Minister has said it. We will not legalize those dangerous drugs that the Conservatives suggested that we will. Thank you very much. I'll turn it back to Mary and be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Yes?
You talk about falsifying disinformation in the American election and Brexit in the UK. Did your government, for the last 40 years, try to stop this kind of misconduct? Now it looks like it happens in our election time. So what if Liberal get elected? Will you do something to stop this kind of like false advertising, misinformation or disinformation?
We already have taken action. Leading up to this election, we have, through the Minister of Democratic Institutions, have put a process in place so that should there be information that is inaccurate, that is fake, that is getting out there to Canadians, that we urge Canadians that we communicate that to Canadians. So we, in fact, have already taken action. That's what today is also about. This is unacceptable. It is unacceptable to target Chinese Canadians with disinformation and with lies, with the sole purpose of misleading them. So this is what today is about, and we thank you for coming so that you are able to help us share this information with Canadians.
Maybe I'll let Alan and Han speak a few words about answering the questions.
Why don't we take another question? Yes, Anise.
Hi, so Anise from Power. My question is for formally investigate this incident. Someone would have a formal complaint. So, are you guys in the process of doing that, or have you guys already started?
I have.
Yeah.
The lie about the real estate tax, we filed a formal complaint. Facebook has taken it down. Every major media organization has denounced it. It's a lie. They found it crawling through our garbage cans, and they should have left it there. It's an absolute flat-out lie. But the trouble is that the Conservatives know they can't win by telling the truth. They think they can fool people by lying because they know their platform doesn't impress anybody. And so instead they lie to people. They can't win telling the truth. They're trying to win by lying. And it's a formal complaint's gone into the Elections Commission. Formal complaints have gone into social media. But even when they are faced with the truth, they just find a different route to lie through. And now they're running ads on television screens throughout Chinatown in my riding. It's deceitful. And I don't know why they think lying to the Chinese community is an effective tactic. It's profoundly dishonorable. It insults their family names. And quite frankly, it insults Canadians of all backgrounds.
Any further questions?
I just have like a small follow-up question. With Facebook, what was their, like they took it down, but did they have any formal like
No.
statement?
Facebook refused to take it down. They just labeled it deliberately misleading. Facebook has not assumed the same level of responsibilities that other social media platforms have. But at the end of the day, it's up to news organizations, and I'm a former journalist. Repeating a lie as a journalist is still lying. And when the Conservatives are caught in a flat-out lie, the obligation of journalists is not to repeat it and say, decide for yourself. Your job is to tell people they're being lied to, because they're being lied to. And that's dishonorable conduct. And as I said, they can't win telling the truth, and so they only have one option, and that's to lie to people. And they think they can lie to the Chinese community particularly because they hide it behind the Chinese language. If they were to come into my riding and talk about hard drugs the way they talk about hard drugs in the Chinese media, they would be laughed out of the campaign. It's time they get laughed out of this campaign.